Natalia Vorova had learned from childhood that dreams aren't borrowed. They're built, brick by brick, with hands calloused from hard work and a throat full of songs. She grew up in Minsk, the capital of Belarus, in a low-ceilinged apartment with windows overlooking an inner courtyard where neighbors hung their laundry in the winter and chatted in the summer. Her mother, Irina, worked as an accountant at a state-owned company. Her father, Dmitry, drove long-haul trucks and came home smelling of diesel and the open road. They were ordinary people, the kind who keep a country going without anyone noticing. But Natalia didn't want to be ordinary. From the age of 7, she took singing lessons at a municipal school where the peeling walls couldn't muffle the sound of a voice that even then showed promise. At 17, she participated in a local talent contest at a cultural club in the Frunzensky neighborhood in southern Minsk. She didn't win, but people remembered her. That, to her, was worth more. When she finished college, a degree in social communication that never fully excited her, she made a decision her parents received with the exact mix of pride and fear, known only to parents who love too much. She moved to St. Petersburg, Russia, to work as a freelance model. The city welcomed her with its imperial beauty and characteristic coldness. The winters there are unforgiving. The castings, too. Natalia was attractive, light brown hair, grey eyes, a smile that was slow to appear but filled the room when it did. And she had something photographers call presence, that indefinable quality that makes the lens seek her out even when there are other people in the frame. She traveled to Vietnam for a sportswear campaign. She went to Indonesia for a catalogue of handmade jewelry. She spent 3 weeks in China for a cosmetics brand that never ended up publishing the images. Her mother commented on every photo on Instagram. "The most beautiful girl in the world," she wrote, not caring if she seemed to be exaggerating. But the modeling industry has a cruel arithmetic. For every girl who makes it, there are 100 waiting. Jobs were scarce. Between contracts, Natalia waited tables at cafes in downtown St. Petersburg, smiling at customers who didn't know that the woman bringing them coffee had posed in front of professional cameras in 3 different countries. She didn't complain. She waited. In September 2025, while checking her email on a gray morning, she found the message that would change everything. The sender identified themselves as a representative of a fashion agency based in Bangkok, Thailand. The text was written in formal English without spelling errors and featured a corporate logo that looked legitimate. They were offering her a contract to be the face of a seasonal collection with a photo shoot in Thailand, accommodation included, and a fee that was double what she earned in a month working at the cafe. All she needed to do was confirm her availability and book the flight, which they would cover, within the next 10 days. Natalia read the email 3 times. Then she called her mother. Irina listened in silence. She asked her to look into the agency before replying. Natalia promised to do so. She searched for the company's name online and found a website with photos of models, a contact number, and client references in Europe. Everything seemed in order. What she couldn't know, what no one in her position could have known, was that the site had been set up 3 weeks earlier, specifically to deceive people like her. She replied to the email the next day, "I'm available. Thank you for the opportunity." On September 11, 2025, Natalia Vorova packed her suitcase in the small room she rented in the Vasilyevsky district of St. Petersburg. She packed 2 dresses, comfortable clothes for the heat, her compact camera, her documents in a blue plastic folder, and her phone charger. She told her roommate she'd be back in 2 weeks. She said goodbye to her mother via video call. Irina asked her to send photos as soon as she landed. "I promise," Natalia said, and she smiled that smile that was slow to appear. The plane landed in Bangkok at 6 in the morning, when the city hadn't quite woken up yet, but was already sweating. Natalia walked down the jet bridge with her backpack slung over her shoulder and her eyes wide open in that particular way people have when they arrive at a place they've always imagined but never set foot in. Suvarnabhumi Airport welcomed her with its futuristic architecture, its ceilings mimicking bird wings, and its endless corridors where Thai, Mandarin, and English blend into a constant, orderly hum. She passed through immigration without a hitch. The stamp on her passport was quick, mechanical. The officer didn't even look her in the eye. Outside, the September heat in Bangkok is a physical presence, humid, dense, inescapable. Natalia had been to Asia before, but the Thai tropics have an intensity all their own. Tuk-tuks zigzagged between cars. Street vendors were already grilling lemongrass chicken on street corners, and Buddhist temples peeked out from among the skyscrapers as reminders that this city exists in two simultaneous times. She was picked up by a young man waiting with a sign bearing her name. He introduced himself as Krit, the agency's local coordinator. He spoke functional English, smiled easily, and during the ride to the hotel, explained that the photo shoot would begin in 4 days, that she first needed to rest and acclimate, and that she could message him on WhatsApp with any questions. He handed her a business card with the supposed agency's logo embossed in gold. The hotel was small but clean, in the Sukhumvit district. It had a window overlooking a side street where massage parlors and street food stalls coexisted without a hitch. Natalia sent a photo to her mother as soon as she entered the room. The bed, the window, the street below. I arrived safely. Everything's perfect, she wrote. During the first few days, Bangkok charmed her. She visited Wat Pho Temple with its reclining Buddha images covered in gold leaf. She walked through the Dam Noan Saduak floating market, where vendors rode through narrow canals with barges loaded with tropical fruits she couldn't name. She ate pad thai at a plastic table on the sidewalk, with the fan spinning above her head and the fish sauce permeating the air. She liked everything. She wrote to Irina every night. But Krit kept postponing the shoot. One day, it was because of the weather. Another because of a change in location. Another because the lead photographer had run into a setback. Natalia began to feel a sense of unease she didn't quite know how to name. It wasn't fear yet. It was more like a question settling at the back of her throat that couldn't find an answer. On the 7th day, Krit sent her a message on WhatsApp. The shoot had been moved to Yangon, Myanmar. The brand wanted images with a different visual context, he explained. The tickets had already been purchased. The flight was leaving the next day at 7:20 a.m. Natalia hesitated. Myanmar wasn't part of the original agreement, but Krit was patient, kind, and convincing. He sent her a PDF with the itinerary, the name of the hotel in Yangon, and the local photographer's contact information. Everything looked legitimate. And she had been in Bangkok for a week without working, her savings dwindling, and the promise of the contract floating before her eyes as something she couldn't afford to lose. That night, she called her mother. Irina asked if she was sure. Natalia said yes, though her voice had a different tone, thinner. She promised that as soon as she landed in Yangon, she would let her know. On September 20th, 2025, at 7:20 a.m., Natalia Vorova passed through security at Suvarnabhumi Airport and boarded Thai Airways flight TG301, bound for Yangon. Security cameras recorded her walking alone down the boarding corridor, her backpack slung over her shoulder and the blue folder of documents under her arm. No one was with her. No one was waiting for her on the right side. Yangon smells of incense, of recent rain, and of something that has no exact name, but feels in the chest like a warning. It is a city that bears the marks of its British colonial history, in buildings with ochre facades and arched windows that time and humidity are slowly consuming. The overflowing markets, the golden pagodas gleaming from every hill, the monks in saffron robes walking barefoot along the sidewalks. Myanmar possesses a unique, ancient beauty that has nothing to do with what awaited Natalia as she walked through the arrivals gate at Yangon International Airport. 2 men were waiting for her. It wasn't Crit. One held a sign with her name written by hand. The other said nothing. When Natalia asked for Crit, the first man replied in English with a thick accent that there had been a change of plans, that he would take her directly to the location. Before she could process the situation, she was already inside a dark windowed van, moving through streets she didn't recognize and that no one had shown her on any map. She tried to open WhatsApp to text her mother. The man in the back seat, who until then had remained silent, reached out with a calmness that was more terrifying than any scream. "The phone," he said. It was a command without a sound. Natalia handed it over. Then they asked for her passport for the hotel registration. She handed that over as well, and at that very moment, though she didn't yet have the words for it, she ceased to be a person with a verifiable identity and became a commodity with an assigned price. The journey lasted hours. The van left Yangon heading north, then turned west, skirting unmarked roads where the jungle closed in over the asphalt like a canopy of foliage. When the vehicle stopped, Natalia didn't know where in the country she was. Later, she would realize that they had taken her to an area near the Thai border, a region controlled not by the Burmese government, but by armed militias operating with the autonomy of a parallel state. From the outside, the complex looked like a business park. Multi-story buildings, electric generators, satellite dishes, cargo trucks coming and going. There was a perimeter fence topped with barbed wire and men with visible weapons at the access checkpoints. Inside, the silence was the kind that is deliberately constructed. Not an absence of sound, but an absence of will. They took her to a room on the second floor of one of the buildings. There were 4 cots, a window with bars painted gray, and a shared bathroom at the end of the hallway. 3 other women were there. One was Filipino, another Vietnamese, and the third spoke a language Natalia couldn't identify. None of them explained anything to her that night. Not out of indifference, but because they already knew that explanations would come on their own, and that it was better not to rush that moment. The next day, a middle-aged man speaking Mandarin with an interpreter by his side explained to Natalia the terms of her new reality with the cold detachment of someone reviewing an employment contract. She had a debt to pay off, the cost of her transportation, her lodging, and her food. Until that debt was paid off, she would work at the center. Her task was to create fake profiles on dating apps and social media, make contact with men in Europe, the United States, and Latin America, build relationships of trust over weeks or months, and finally convince them to invest in cryptocurrency platforms that were actually fraud schemes completely controlled by the organization. There was no negotiable quota. There were no days off. There was no way to walk out the front doors without consequences, which the man described with a clinical precision that was more unsettling than any explicit threat. Natalia listened to everything without interrupting. When the man finished, she asked for her passport and her phone. The interpreter smiled faintly, as if hearing a question he already knew by heart, and motioned for her to return to her room. The workdays began at 6 in the morning and ended past midnight. She was assigned a computer with restricted access to certain applications, an instruction manual on how to construct a convincing false identity, and a list of potential targets categorized by nationality, estimated income level, and degree of emotional vulnerability. Everything was documented in spreadsheets. Everything had metrics. Everything was a business. During the first few weeks, Natalia resisted. She typed messages with deliberate slowness, failed to meet the required daily quotas, and made mistakes that sabotaged conversations before they reached the investment phase. The consequences arrived on schedule. First a reduction in food rations, then isolation, then something she preferred not to remember when the early morning hours left her awake, staring at the concrete ceiling. She quickly learned that resisting out loud changed nothing. that the only way to survive was to appear obedient while, deep down, she clung to something no one could take away from her yet. The certainty that outside, in an apartment in Minsk, her mother was still waiting for news. Time inside the complex worked differently. There were no weeks or months with defined edges, only a succession of identical days that stuck together like damp pages. Natalia stopped counting the days sometime in October. She began to measure everything in small acts of internal resistance. The time she managed to memorize the name of the building closest to the perimeter fence. The afternoon she faked a technical glitch on the computer to gain 20 minutes without supervision. The night the Filipino woman, whose name was Marisol, whispered to her in English that she had arrived 7 months ago, believing she was going to work in a restaurant in Kuala Lumpur. 7 months. Natalia felt the ground shifting, even though she was standing still. The routine was relentless in its monotony. They woke before dawn to the sound of generators starting up. There was one bathroom for too many people and hot water only for brief intervals. Breakfast was rice with a watery soy sauce that smelled of metal. Then the day began in front of the computer. Fake profiles, calculated conversations, relationships built on lies that Natalia learned to sustain with a precision that embarrassed her and at the same time kept her alive. She had been assigned 5 different identities depending on the type of victim. For middle-aged European men, she used the profile of a 32-year-old German woman, a financial executive, recently divorced. For Latin Americans, she constructed the character of a Colombian woman living in Miami, an entrepreneur with a stock smile that the system rotated through conversations. Each profile had a history, tastes, routines, and AI-generated photos that were impossible to distinguish from the real ones. Supervisors reviewed every conversation. If the tone was too cold, they corrected it. If the victim showed signs of distrust, there was a specific protocol to salvage the relationship. It was a job requiring emotional precision. And that was the most unsettling part. It demanded from her exactly what she had always had in abundance: empathy, the ability to connect, the gift of making people feel seen. At first, she cried at night, when the lights went out, and the only sound was the breathing of the other women and the distant hum of the generator. Later, she stopped crying, not because the pain had lessened, but because the body learns to ration even tears when resources are scarce. She slept in the fetal position with the empty blue folder of documents under the mattress, not because she kept anything inside, but because it was the only object she had brought from her previous life, and she needed to feel that something of it still existed. The penalties for poor performance were graded and documented with the same bureaucratic coldness as everything else. First, a reduction in food rations. Then isolation in a windowless room for periods that could last anywhere from 12 to 48 hours. Then other things that Natalia processed from outside herself, as if they were events happening to someone she was observing from a safe distance. That dissociation mechanism wasn't weakness. It was the architecture of survival. Marisol taught her some unwritten rules that were worth more than any manual. Don't look supervisors in the eye for too long. Don't speak in the hallway between buildings. Don't mention countries, cities, or the names of people on the outside. If someone asked how you were, the correct answer was always fine, working. The walls had no ears because they didn't need them. There were cameras in every corner, and co-workers themselves, under enough pressure, could become unwitting extensions of the surveillance system. There was a moment in mid-October when Natalia briefly had access to a phone. One of the supervisors left it on a table for 4 minutes while he dealt with a problem in another room. 4 minutes. Natalia stared at it from her chair without moving for the first 2. Then she did the math. If she sent a message, to whom? What would she say? Did she even know where she was with enough precision for someone to find her? She didn't have the number of any embassy memorized, She'd known her mother's number by heart since she was 12. She picked up the phone. She opened the messaging app. She typed, "Mom, I'm in Myanmar. I don't know exactly where. Help me." Before she could send it, the supervisor returned. Natalia left the phone exactly where it was. The supervisor picked it up without looking at it. She returned to her screen. Her hands didn't tremble until 20 minutes later, when no one was watching anymore. That night, in the darkness of the room, she repeated the message in her head, as if sending it silently also counted. As if her mother could hear from the other side of the world the weight of those words that had gone nowhere. "Mom, I'm in Myanmar. I don't know exactly where. Help me." Outside, the generators were still running, the cameras were still recording, and somewhere in Minsk, Irina Varova was checking her phone for the 10th time that day, waiting for a sign of life that hadn't appeared in weeks. Irina Varova had learned to live with the uncertainty of having an adventurous daughter. She had survived the trips to Vietnam, to Indonesia, to China, each with its share of sleepless nights and messages that took longer than expected to arrive. But this was different. This had a quality that no previous wait had had. Natalia's last message had arrived on October 4th, a brief line with no photo attached, lacking the usual tone of restrained enthusiasm that characterized her communications. "Everything's fine. I'll talk more tomorrow." Irina had read it 3 times, searching for something between the lines, some sign that her daughter was truly okay. She found nothing specific to alarm her, nor did she find anything to fully reassure her. Tomorrow never came. On the 5th day of silence, Irina called the number of the supposed agency. No one answered. On the 7th day, the number was disconnected. On the 10th, the website had vanished from the internet, as if it had never existed. Dmitry, the father, who had just returned from a long trip through the north of the country, found his wife sitting in the kitchen with the phone on the table and the eyes of someone who had already crossed the threshold between worry and real fear. They filed a report with the Belarusian authorities. The process was slow, bureaucratic, and full of forms requesting information they didn't have. Exact address in Thailand, employer's full name, employment contract number. None of that existed. What did exist were the emails from the fake agency, the screenshots of conversations with Crit, and the itinerary in PDF format with a gold letterhead. The authorities received them, registered them, and told them they would follow up on the case. The Belarusian Ministry of Foreign Affairs contacted the honorary consulate in Bangkok. Thai authorities confirmed that Natalia had entered the country on September 12th without any irregularities and had voluntarily left on the 20th of the same month on a commercial flight bound for Yangon. That was all they could verify from their side of the border. Whatever happened afterward was outside their jurisdiction. Myanmar was another story. The country's political situation since the 2021 military coup made any international coordination slow, fragmented, and often fruitless. The border areas where the forced labor camps operated were not under the control of the central government, but of militias with their own chains of command, their own interests, and their own interpretation of what the law meant. Irina contacted a Bangkok-based human rights organization that handled trafficking cases in Southeast Asia. They explained the situation with a frankness she struggled to process. Finding someone inside those camps was extremely difficult, and extracting her without direct negotiation with the captors was practically impossible. They advised her to keep all diplomatic channels open and wait. Wait. As if that was something a mother could do without breaking down. Then the call came. It was an unidentified number. The man on the other end spoke English with an accent Irina couldn't place geographically. He told her he had information about her daughter. That Natalia was alive, but in a delicate situation. That they could resolve it. The price was $500,000 US, a cryptocurrency transfer, untraceable, within 72 hours. Irina recorded the call with trembling hands. Dmitry listened to the recording 4 times. They immediately called the authorities and the organization in Bangkok. Everyone said the same thing. It was a well-known tactic. The kidnappers or their intermediaries contacted the families knowing they would pay whatever it took. The sum was deliberately out of reach for most, designed to breed desperation and partial payments that offered no guarantee of a resolution either. $500,000. Irina and Dmitry were middle-income earners in a country where average salaries wouldn't reach that amount even after decades of combined work. They called relatives, friends, and acquaintances. They posted on social media. They opened an account to receive donations. They raised a tiny fraction of what was demanded. When they tried to negotiate, offering what they had gathered as a down payment, the intermediary disappeared for several days. Then he called back. This time the voice was different, more direct. To the point. They told Irina that the negotiation was over, that Natalia had died, that her organs had been sold, that the body had been cremated, and there was nothing left to hand over. Irina didn't scream. She didn't cry at that moment. There was a silence of the kind that fills every available space in a room and leaves no room for any human sound. Then she hung up the phone, went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stayed in there for a time that Dmitry didn't want to measure from outside. When the Belarusian authorities received the report of the call, they were cautious in their assessment. The experts consulted pointed out that the claim of death could be part of the same extortion strategy. By declaring the victim dead and cremated, the captors eliminated any possibility of a physical rescue while keeping the door open to charge for supposed additional information or for remains that did not actually exist or were unverifiable. The Belarusian Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued an official statement. Natalia Varova remained classified as a missing person. There was no physical evidence to confirm her death. Investigations were still ongoing. That bureaucratic distinction between missing and dead, which took up no more than a single line in official documents, was the only thing Irina could cling to. As long as there was no certainty, there was a possibility. And as long as there was a possibility, she would keep staring at her phone with that mix of terror and hope known only to those who love someone the world cannot find. Natalia Varova's Instagram profile remained active. No one had closed it because doing so would have meant accepting something Irina was not yet ready to accept. The latest photos were from Bangkok, a temple at sunset, a plate of street food, a selfie in front of the Chao Phraya River with her hair damp from the tropical humidity and that smile that was slow to appear. The comments from the past few months were from people who had seen the story on social media, writing in Russian, English and Belarusian, expressing solidarity, outrage, and hope. Her mother replied to some. To others, she simply gave a like, as if that small gesture were a way to keep a conversation with the world alive, while the conversation that mattered most remained suspended. Natalia's case was not unique. It was one among tens of thousands. The border region between Myanmar and Thailand had experienced a brutal expansion of these complexes since the military coup in February 2021. What began as small, scattered operations had become a criminal industry on an industrial scale. More than 200,000 people trafficked throughout Southeast Asia, according to United Nations estimates, with Myanmar accounting for between 100,000 and 120,000 active victims in conditions of forced labor. They came from 60 different countries. Young people with specific dreams and precise vulnerabilities that the recruitment networks knew how to identify and exploit with an efficiency that was difficult to comprehend without acknowledging that behind it all lay cold, systematic intelligence. The complexes operated with state-of-the-art technology, artificial intelligence to generate personalized conversation scripts based on the psychological profile of each potential victim. Fake cryptocurrency platforms with professional interfaces indistinguishable from legitimate ones. video deepfakes to sustain fabricated identities for months, spreadsheets tracking which nationalities responded best to which type of emotional approach and in which week of the relationship it was most effective to introduce the investment proposal. It was the industrialization of deception. In February 2025, under mounting international pressure following several high-profile cases, Thailand cut off electricity, internet, and gas supplies to 5 border cities in Burmese territory where the complexes were concentrated. The criminal organization's response was immediate. They installed satellite internet terminals that allowed them to continue operating without significant interruption. More than 7,000 people were evacuated in the following months. But evacuated was a generous term to describe what actually happened. They were moved from confinement to transit camps where 800 people shared 10 bathrooms and slept on concrete floors, waiting for their governments to arrange repatriations that in many cases took months or never arrived. The system was failing on every level simultaneously. Irina Vorova understood this, not through official reports, but through late-night conversations with other mothers she had met in social media groups. Women from the Philippines, Vietnam, Kenya, India, all with the same story but different names. All with the same unanswered question, circulating among them like an object no one wanted to hold on to for too long. Where are our children? The Belarusian Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirmed that it was continuing to coordinate with Thai authorities and with honorary consulates in Yangon and Bangkok. That the case remained open. That Natalia was still officially classified as missing. That word, missing, contained within it all possibilities simultaneously. Alive, dead, recoverable, lost forever. It was a word designed by bureaucracy to survive uncertainty, but it wasn't designed for a mother to carry with her upon waking each morning. Dmitry had visibly aged in 2 months. He drove less. He spoke less. Some nights, Irina would find him in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, staring at his phone screen with Natalia's profile picture open, that selfie taken in front of the river in Bangkok, as if looking at it long enough might reveal something they hadn't yet seen. There was no body. There were no verifiable ashes. There was no physical evidence of any kind to confirm what the captors had claimed. And in that absence of evidence, horror and hope coexisted. Because as long as there was no absolute certainty, there was a possibility that in some compound on the Burmese border, behind a barbed wire fence and cameras at every angle, a young woman from Minsk was still silently repeating a message she had been unable to send. Mom, I'm in Myanmar. I don't know exactly where. Help me. Natalia Vorova had traveled to fulfill a dream. What she found on the other side had no name in any language she knew. Her story did not end with justice or resolution or the kind of closure that stories need to feel complete. It ended, for now, in an open question that her family holds on to every day, with the same silent stubbornness with which we hold on to the things we cannot let go of, because letting them go would mean losing them twice. And that, for Irina, was the one thing she was not willing to do.